Well, welcome to Fast Forward, part of an ongoing conversation about living in the future. I'm Dan Costa, editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, and my guest today is Ophir Tanz. Ophir is the CEO and founder of GumGum, a firm that started off as a computer vision company and is quickly becoming, and I want to get this phrase correct, a full-stack vertical AI solution company.
Nailed it.
We're going to talk about AI, how AI is transforming, how it's being used in advertising today, but also how AI is transforming really every industry that it touches. And we're very pleased to have Ophir here. Thanks so much for coming into the labs to talk.
Thank you for having me.
So you're in town for Advertising Week.
I am.
You've got a number of AI-based advertising applications. Let's start there and say, like, how are you using AI today in the advertising space?
Yeah, so GumGum at its core is a computer vision company. And we express that technology in a variety of ways. So our largest business unit is our advertising unit. And we invented an advertising format called in-image advertising, where we currently work with about 70% of Fortune 100 brands and many of the largest publishers in the world. And what we do is we contextually place marketing messages in line with content users are actively engaging with. So we'll identify the context of images in this case and actually align marketing messages to them.
So, and you've got a number of examples of this on your website. It's really cool. I don't think that most people know that it's happening when they actually encounter a website and they see this type of advertisement. They think, wow, they think it may have been programmed that way, but you're actually taking the content of the photo and then delivering an ad that's based on the photo, not necessarily the site or even the article.
Correct. So yeah, the idea is that users visit sites. Photos are typically the hero unit of a given web page. If you look at any eye tracking study, you'll see that most of the heat is sort of centered around photos. So the idea is really to create a very native placement, but also certainly has display properties. It tends to be relatively impactful. And it has really nice characteristics in that we're not required to fill every single inventory opportunity. So what we're able to do is really only load up ads when they're really relevant to that user and that context at any moment in time. And that also has the great effect of producing what we think is a much better user experience because you see our ads much more infrequently, but when you do, they're more impactful. And it also has the additional benefit of empowering publishers in many cases to remove other standard formats from their properties and return real estate to those publisher sites to use for content.
Yeah, I mean, in the studies I've seen, it's not that people hate the ads, they hate the volume.
Yeah.
They hate the volume, they hate the intrusiveness, they hate the pop-ups. Seeing the ad actually doesn't bother them as long as it doesn't interrupt the experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really big problem in the industry today. If you look at your traditional sort of IAB ad formats, you have a number of issues. So one is that they need to load 100% of the time. So no matter what an ad is loading. And you obviously have huge viewability issues associated with that. So when a web page loads, 100% of the IAB ads on that page will load, and you might only scroll a third of the way down. So advertisers are paying for those impressions, but they're never getting seen. They're creating no value. It's effectively equivalent to, I think last time we calculated it, like $10 or $12 billion a year just being burned, going sort of up in smoke. So that's a huge problem. We only actually load our formats when the relevant content comes into view of the browser. So there's almost no wasted impressions whatsoever. And I really do believe that the future of advertising, especially as you move to different devices like tablets and phones, is going to be a much more integrated and selective experience. The idea of advertising is to get a message across to a user that has the benefit of folks making money so they can continue to deliver, in many cases, free content. So our perspective is let's make the ad seen. Let's make it very respectful, but let's show it infrequently. And we think that ultimately is better for all the relevant stakeholders.
I should point out, if you're watching this on Facebook Live, you can ask us questions by entering them into the comments section. We'll endeavor to answer them live on air. If you're watching this later on or listening to the podcast, obviously we are no longer live and we will not be able to answer your questions. Feel free to ask them, but just don't expect answers.
I'll come and answer you later.
Let's talk about a little bit about the sports division that you're operating.
Sure.
Which, again, really interesting in a way of opening up inventory and doing something with computer vision that just wouldn't be practical if you were doing it by hand or by humans.
Yeah. Well, actually, the way it's been done for the last few decades has actually been by hand and by humans, and that's a massively sort of error-prone approach, because what typically happens is you'll take, say, 10 minutes or some segment of a multi-hour game. You'll ship that off to a place typically overseas, and you'll have folks literally manually tag where those sponsorships are appearing and kind of the relative quality of every single exposure, and then they extrapolate that in a black box to the overall value.
So this is somebody looking at the tape, identifying the Coca-Cola logo on the outfield sign, and then saying how many seconds it was in view.
Yeah, and the quality of that view.
And the quality of the
Was it kind of obfuscated, or was it blurry, or how big was it, stuff like that. And what we've done is we've taken actually the same methodology largely, but we do it all programmatically using computer vision. It's a really elegant implementation of that technology, because we're able to look at things comprehensively. So we look at every single moment of every video, every highlight video, every social image, and identify where all those exposures are appearing, but also the quality of those exposures. And then we're enabling all the relative stakeholders, in this case rights holders and brands, to dig into any moment, so that there's no dispute around what the actual quality metric is. And sponsorship is a big business. There's a lot of money spent on these things, and there's a lot of negotiation that has to go on in order to sort of arrive at the appropriate fee. And this takes a lot of the guesswork out of that effort.
Yeah, I think about the W.B. Mason sign at Yankee Stadium that's there in the outfield, and you see it. If you go to the game, you see it. But it's that's something that has to be quantified and has a certain value attached to it. And your tool helps create and figure out that value.
It does. We're even helping rights holders actually reposition camera angles and do stuff of that nature in order to maximize sponsorship exposure. And social is an element that was never looked at really before GumGum in a comprehensive fashion. It turns out that the majority of value produced on social media from a sponsorship perspective happens on non-owned and operated properties. Without employing computer vision, it's impossible to look at the universe of social and actually identify where all those exposures are. So there's been a huge uplift that we've been able to show in the actual value that's being created. And increasingly, that's also how folks are sort of communicating their experiences. So that value relative to television is also rising.
So the thing that powers both these applications is really the computer vision. It's having algorithms that can identify what's in an image, what's in a video image, and then recognize it, put it in a box, and classify it. That's really sort of the core technology that you've built the company around. Where's that going? What's going to be? You've got these two applications. What comes next?
So where is it going for us? So as you mentioned in your intro, we're a full stack sort of vertical AI solutions company, and what that means is ultimately that we have this very powerful technology, and it's relatively new in terms of actually being able to apply it to practical use cases in the world. And when we look at the world, we see a huge amount of industries that can really benefit from this capability. And at this point, very few have actually had the benefit of benefiting from that capability. And if you look at how the options relative to implementing these solutions, you have cloud-based solutions. So you have things like Watson and Google Cloud Vision and Amazon and the like. And the problem is that in order to actually solve a real business need, we believe that you need to have both the business level sort of expertise in-house, but also the technical expertise to specifically build a solution for that particular problem. I have never seen a company or really even a successful product be built off of taking sort of cloud-based AI solutions and integrating them into a product. And the reason for that is you don't have the ability to tweak these things nearly as much as you can. There's really a lot of artistry associated with developing successful AI systems, at least today. And that's more of a bug, not a feature. Ultimately, the stuff will become ultimately more commoditized, which is a good thing, and we're working towards that as well. But also, it's just really expensive. So the things that we do for fractions of a penny would cost you anywhere between 40 cents and $1.50 on a CPM basis from these cloud companies. So it's just not feasible to do really anything at scale using these solutions. Now, there are instances where you can leverage certain types of AI, like natural language processing, and some textual analysis, stuff like that, off of the cloud. But it's really currently limited to those areas. And that's where we see ourselves playing a big role, which is that we do have, again, the expertise from a technical perspective, and we're able to integrate the business level expertise such that we can build a full stack solution. So far we have an advertising and sports. We also have a social division, and we're looking at a number of other opportunities.
So the importance of the complaint I've heard with IBM Watson a lot of times is that you get the tool, but then before you can actually do anything with it, you have to train it, and you have to know what you're training it to do, and that a lot of small businesses just don't have that skill set. Like they need to hire a consultant to then train the AI. How turnkey are your solutions? Like, how would you be doing that differently?
Right. So, so we're all operating off of the same architecture, effectively. So, if you're using neural nets, which is largely what I think Watson is using today, and certainly what we're using as well, there is a training element associated with that. And once you're operating at scale, that does become equally the equal challenge to the algorithmic side of the equation, right? So being able to put together labeled, sizable, unbiased data sets is a requirement. Again, I would call that a bug, not a feature. And it's something that we've been doing for many years and can do very well. Ultimately, the quality of your neural network is going to be a function of the quality of the data that you're able to feed it. So it's not that we're absolved from that, it's just that I think we know how to acquire and label those sets quickly and cost effectively.
It seems to me that one of the advantages of these big giant tech companies, the Amazons, Google, Facebook, is that they have these massive data sets that are really unparalleled in the history of computer science, and that just having access to these data sets is giving them an advantage as we move into this artificial intelligence age. Is that a sustainable advantage, or do you think that upstarts and smaller companies are going to be able to compete?
It's a huge advantage, so you're right in that assumption. Look, data is king, and as long as these things need to be trained with data, then the entities with the most relevant data for whatever the application is are in an advantageous position. What's interesting is that we are heavy contributors to the open source movement. So are all these other companies. We're actually sharing in that knowledge, but we're not sharing in the data as much. There are open data sets that we contribute to and other folks contribute to. We also have a lot of proprietary data, and certainly the large guys too. But it's really problem specific. So one of the things that we're doing, for example, and this is not a core business, but we're doing this more so for the community, is we're collecting the largest collection of dental X-ray imagery in the world. If we did want to build a business off that, for example, that's not something Google or Amazon would have access to. They have no reason to. So they have a certain type of data. They have UGC imagery, for example, UGC video, a lot of location data, a lot of really valuable insight in all types of ways. But if you're trying to identify fissures in pipelines, or if you're trying to optimize crop dusting, I mean, there's an endless amount of applications here. So I would say that they have a benefit in certain ways, and it varies company to company.
So going back to the dental data, what are you going to do with that giant database of...
What we'd like to do is host a worldwide competition similar to ImageNet, which is a competition that Stanford hosts annually, which is seeing which company can most accurately and most expediently sort of label data sets. And we'd like to do something sort of similar to that.
So it's really just a classification project more than a commercial product that you're...
Today, yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about one of the things that unnerves people about AI is they feel like this is a technology that's going to be deployed by governments, it'll be deployed by big companies, but individual consumers are really going to be acted upon by these AIs as opposed to be able to take advantage of them themselves.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair assumption, or is that going to change at some point?
I would say yes and no. I mean, you could argue that individuals are being acted upon and are the prey of every business product out there. Even something like Waze.
Bernie Sanders makes that argument all the time.
But I think that the end consumer is also the largest beneficiary at the end of the day, because at least companies are trying to develop products that are adding value to people's lives and also to other businesses. I think government has its own, I don't know if I should call it nefarious or just not a direct value add, unless you want to look at it from a security perspective, perhaps. But look, this stuff is hard to do. It's not cheap to accomplish. In other words, even just to acquire data sets, it takes resources. So larger entities that are very committed to this effort are going to own it ultimately.
The other thing that comes up all the time is AI as an agent of automation. Using GumGum Sports Division as an example, like that's something that is done now through software that used to be done, albeit overseas, but by humans looking at tape and classifying things. How do you see sort of the job loss that's going to be associated with these types of automations?
Yeah, that concerns me a lot. So, at GumGum, I've seen that happen, right? We develop automated solutions, and that displaces folks that used to tag imagery or video. And you could argue, that is the price of automation. I think that folks oftentimes try to paint a very rosy picture around that and say, all new technology generates new jobs, like look at the Industrial Revolution. And I just don't buy that argument. I think that not all technology is created equal, and not all technology by default creates new jobs. I do think that there is a huge amount of new jobs that have been created in this sense. So for example, folks that might have done the tagging are now potentially tagging and labeling images for us, and it could be kind of the same folks. But ultimately it concerns me a lot. I think it's something that in the long term we're going to have to address as a society. Universal basic income is something that has been discussed increasingly at length at the government levels and elsewhere, and I don't think that that's a bad idea. I think it might be a very good idea. I do think that it has other implications for society and individual happiness that we just don't have the answers to yet. So I think it's a challenging problem, and I think I wish that our current administration and also future administrations would pay a little bit more heed to trying to try to invent and wherever necessary, even subsidize the world of the future rather than trying to bring back coal jobs, of which there are 70,000 in the U.S. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
And they're probably not coming back.
And they're probably not coming back anyway.
Right.
And they shouldn't be back. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for it's not a high quality of life for those individuals, and it's not a long-term sustainable solution.
All right, let's get a question in from the audience.
How likely do you think a universal basic income is?
So pretty much the answer I just gave is probably the best answer I can give at this moment in time. I don't think we have the data or enough sort of insight into what the implications of doing something like that might be. I know that there are some governments around the world that are sort of experimenting with these things. That will be very interesting to sort of witness and learn from. And I also don't think that we're at a place now where we need to institute anything like a universal basic income system. I think this is a longer term sort of problem, and I think it's one option in a much larger arsenal. I don't think anybody has a great answer to that question, but if they do, I'd be curious to hear it.
Yeah, and I think we're just starting to wrap our heads around the consequences of all these new technologies. That these are all relatively new developments, and it seems like it's happening a lot faster than the Industrial Revolution did, and we're going to need to sort of internalize what the consequences of having AI-driven cars and self-driving cars and trucks that are on the roads and all these different things. And once that comes home to us, I think that then we can have a realistic discussion of how we compensate.
Yeah, I think one thing that we talk about in my company a lot is this notion of constant and dramatic change, and I think that is the one fundamental truth of the world in which we now live. And if you look at what that means in a technical sense, it means that you have a variety of technologies that are growing in capabilities on an exponential curve. And I'm talking about everything from pixel resolutions to hard drive capacities to processing speeds, and then you also have software development as well. And you have all of these technologies sort of at different inflection points on these curves, but a lot of them are inflecting, and that's what actually makes AI possible today is effectively GPUs and processing speed. These algorithms go back to the 50s and 60s, and the first neural network was developed in the 60s, I think actually in the 50s. It had like 40 neurons. So what's amazing about exponential growth is this notion that, for example, if you're going to take 30 linear steps at a meter per step, then after 30 steps you will have traversed 30 meters, so we would have walked across this room. But if you take 30 exponential steps, which is in this case just a simple doubling, 1, 2, 4, 8, then after 30 steps you will have traversed the circumference of the Earth 26 times, so about 1 billion meters. And what's especially interesting about that is most of that growth happens in the last few steps. So at step 29, you're at 500 million meters. And that's what's so deceiving about exponential growth, is that for a long time it looks a lot like linear growth, and actually it could actually lag behind linear growth curves that have greater growth in each linear period. But it ends up being something dramatically different. And that makes the future incredibly exciting and in many ways mysterious and incredibly difficult to predict. At GumGum, we try to look at the longer term time horizon, things like AR and VR and wearables and IoT and stuff like that. But we also try to plan our business in sort of 2-year increments, because we believe that that's pretty much as far as you could see, and also certainly as far as you're able to sort of determine and build a commercializable product, which in itself is a challenge. And I think that this is the challenge that is sort of eating the world today. Certainly legacy companies are experiencing this, and it's sort of the dominant force. It's not the same situation as it was centuries before, when you could develop a business model and it could work, and you can kind of just like, that change cycle was much longer. So you can sort of reap the rewards on a longer term basis. And now you have to constantly be innovating and sort of growing your understanding of the world, and try to understand the various paradigm shifts that are relevant to your enterprise and build towards them.
And being flexible and being able to respond is probably more useful than being right about what's going to happen in 5 years from now, because nobody knows what's going to happen.
It's also why you see such maniacal investment in all these future, because everyone knows the companies aren't dumb, right? These large, I'm talking about large corporations, they know that they're sort of living off of legacy businesses. They know that things are changing very dramatically, and they know that they need to make big bets. So we're seeing very big, very bold company betting bets, because that's the only choice that they have. And that's also why startups, I think, are going to continue to be hugely valuable and additive and successful, because ultimately when you are in a period of stasis, it's hard, whether you're investing or whether you're growing a company, it's hard to sort of create new value. But when everything is changing all of the time, then there's a lot of opportunity for value creation.
I want to, I think you make such a great point when you talk about exponential thinking and how hard it is to wrap your head around the shape of those curves. I'm stealing from one of your previous talks where you said by 2023, $1,000 will get you a device that has the computing power of a human brain.
Yeah.
It'll be replicating that much processing power. By 2043, which most of us may still be alive then, you'll have the processing power for $1,000 that's greater than all of the brains on the planet.
Combined, yeah.
What does that do to...
So that's a really interesting point. And just to be fair, I stole that from Ray Kurzweil.
Okay.
So he did that analysis.
We're all standing on the shoulders of giants.
I don't want to take credit for that. But it is a really instructive point. And again, I don't think that we're, as a society, as a species, especially good at thinking exponentially. Our brains are constructed to think linearly. That ultimately offers more sort of survival potential. And it didn't offer a lot of benefits in sort of in the African bush thousands of years ago, right? So, I mean, the implications of that are huge, because a lot of things can be brute forced, right? You have sort of quality of algorithms and technology, and that could always get more sort of elegant. But if you have enough processing power, then you could do a lot of things that were never before possible simply by throwing more computing power at it. In some ways, you could argue that neural networks, I'm sure we're going to look back at the technology and feel like it was fairly inelegant. And if you look at the amount of processing power it takes relative to the human brain, and this is the poor image of what the human brain is actually doing, the brain uses a tiny amount of the power that these sort of machines do to do these calculations. So I think that that's just testament to the fact that the future is really difficult to predict. It's going to change more dramatically than anybody really realizes. And then it does also sort of harken to the point of the quality of software, because if we are able to develop high enough quality software, then clearly the computing power issue is not going to be the limiting factor. Like if you want to talk about general AI or super intelligence, the limiting factor is going to be our ability to develop the right software, because obviously if you can buy a chip that has the equivalent computing power of that of the entire human population for $1,000, then that's probably more power than you need by maybe 7 billion fold.
So there's a bunch of industries we know are going to be transformed. We can tell we're going to have self-driving cars, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in 10, but certainly by 20, people pretty much assume it's going to happen. Is there an industry that you think will be transformed by artificial intelligence that we haven't thought of yet, or that is very unprepared for that transformation?
So look, this is a very powerful tool in a sea of other powerful tools, technology, software, hardware. I can't think of an industry that can't benefit from the integration of AI capabilities. You're able to process data, process video, just better. And every industry can benefit from that. So that's why I see so much power in sort of being able to build vertical stack AI solutions, because ultimately there's just endless amounts of opportunity here.
I want to ask you the questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. What technological trend concerns you the most? Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
Weaponized nuclear energy or nuclear
An oldie but a goodie.
It's just come back in fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, a little concerning. Is there a technology or tool that you use every day that inspires wonder? On the flip side.
So I've gotten very into woodworking, actually, and mostly traditional woodworking, over the past 8 months or so. So a lot of hand planes and block planes and spoke shaves, and honestly, I find that very inspiring. They're just these really beautiful tools that, to me, speak very much to human ingenuity, and it's nice to be dealing with. So I just find these very simple yet very powerful and effective tools that humans invented to be kind of inspiring.
There's probably a large automated machine driven by an AI that could also do the same type of woodworking treatments.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a level of artistry and gratification that I don't, I think that that is part of what makes up the human experience. And just because, I mean, look, I actually have a lot of power tools as well, and you always get a better finish and a better product in the end with the hand tools. But ultimately, that is one of the challenges, right? If we are actually not the most intelligent species on the planet, that has really profound implications, obviously. First off, we can look at how we treat lesser sort of intelligences on Earth, and that isn't a very pleasant sight. And I think it really calls into question what it means to be human, and what you should be doing with a life, what qualifies for happiness. So there's obviously pretty profound questions, and I do think that sooner or later we are going to have to contend with them. I don't think that this stuff is around the corner. I think that we are many breakthroughs away from anything representing or even starting to look like sort of a conscious intelligence. But whether it's in 40 years or 400 years, it's a relative tiny sort of blip on the scale of human history. So it is worth speaking about the sort of implications of what these things are. Nobody is talking about stopping the development of these technologies. We're very curious by nature, obviously, and that's just not an option. And I don't think that should be an option either. But in all likelihood, we're going to get there before we've developed the right protocols for contending with what those realities look like. And it goes back to the sort of exponential nature of change, is that we're going to arrive at certain capabilities faster than we're prepared for. And I don't think that the government or bureaucracy or even businesses today are equipped to be able to sort of manage change at that kind of a pace. And the level of change is going to be necessary to actually properly sort of tend to it. Will create some level of confusion.
And in the meantime, you'll be working in your wood shop.
That's what I'm woodworking. Plan B.
What type of things are you making? Can I ask?
Like stools and bowls and spoons and stuff like that. It's fairly simple right now. I'm a novice looking for a mentor. But it's very gratifying to sort of live in sort of this digital space of bits and bytes that I've always loved. I've been a programmer from a young age. I was always very drawn to that, and I still love it as much as ever, but it's just the antithesis of that. It's very physical and manual, and sort of you're dealing with mostly wood, which is sort of, it's a nice juxtaposition.
Very organic. It's funny
Very organic, yeah.
how many technologists have come on the show with great programming skills and great chops, and yet the things they take pleasure from tend to be those real world things where they're actually working with their hands.
Yeah. Getting back to that sort of side of things is gratifying.
So if a mentor is watching right now and they want to get in touch with you, or they just want to follow what you and GumGum are doing, how can they get in touch with you online?
You could find me on Twitter at Ophir Tanz, on LinkedIn also, Ophir Tanz, at our website at GumGum.com, all types of ways.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Ophir, thanks so much for coming by the lab.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. That's Fast Forward for today. I want to thank you for joining us. If you want to see back episodes of this show, you can find them on PCMag.com. If you want to hear the podcast on iTunes, you can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Android Play. You can find it everywhere that fine podcasts are given away for free. Thanks so much for joining us today, and I'll see you in the future.